Isaac LaFont and Eric Douglas this time.
There we go.
How are you guys doing today?
Fantastic.
Very well.
I feel funny asking that because literally we were just together about 30 minutes ago recording the other podcast. So if you missed last week's show that we recorded about 30 minutes ago, we talked about how much, should you pay off your mortgage? Should you make a lump sum payoff? Or should you make a lump sum payment to pay it off? Should you make additional principal payments? Make sure you go back and check that out. That's a great conversation. We've had lots and lots of clients ask about that. We've had, when we did a show on this on our radio show about a year and a half or so ago, we had several calls of, hey, let me come in and talk to you about that. I'm curious how that affects me. So make sure you go check that out. It was a great conversation, which kind of leads to this week's conversation, which is a follow-up to what we did 2 weeks ago when we discussed how much a car actually cost you. So again, if you didn't catch that show, go back to your podcast, download that show. That was a great conversation. So we thought we would do, this is really Eric's topic. So what we thought we'd do this week is talk about how much education actually costs you with your kids. That's kind of the gist of it, right?
Yeah, basically, yes. Taking a look at what the true cost of schooling is over a child's school life, right? Going from kindergarten or even really starting through daycare, which is darn near college.
I can do
right?
some quantification on that.
Yeah, I think it was funny because we all have kids at different levels of school right now. Yeah. Isaac's got kids in daycare, and my kids are in elementary school level, and yours are a little bit older in high school, middle school, and high school. So I think we all can come at this from a little bit different vantage point. Yeah,
so it's it's interesting because I think we have conversations with clients, and we get this question a lot, right? How much is budgeting for college? How much is it going to cost me? And we run some college estimates, and when you pull up those estimates, people are absolutely floored at how much. Now, this is looking in the future, right? But looking at future cost of college, especially you have let's say a newborn up to like 10, 12, the costs are absolutely staggering, right? Oh, yeah. And so that's what we thought we'd do is just take a look at what education actually costs. And we're going to come at this from two different perspectives, which is kind of cool because, Isaac has a couple kids that are in daycare, which those numbers are unbelievable. And we're sort of in the same camp because mine costs a little bit less than what he's paying now. And that makes sense because mine's been out of daycare for a while. But Eric comes from a perspective of I'm paying for elementary school in a private setting, right? Mm-hmm. And I come from a perspective, my kids are in public school. Now, I'm going to talk about that as we kind of go along because I made a decision to actually move to a different county to put my kids in public school versus staying where I lived and having them in private school. But that was a decision that I made, or my family made. Their mom, I'm no longer with my kid's mom, so that's what the two of us decided, even though she doesn't make decisions for me, just make that real clear. but that's a decision that we sat down.
Let's just camp here for about 5 more minutes.
Yeah. That's another show we're going to do, by the way. No, I'm just kidding. No, we did talk about that.
Family Wealth Planning Partners After Hours.
Yeah, that's right. But it's interesting because when we talk about education, it is something that we all have to consider from the day you start having children until they go to college is, A, how do you fund it? B, how much is it actually going to cost you? And then are there, what decisions all of us make? Because we get clients that walk in the door that make all kinds of decisions based on where they want their kids to go to school, whether it be private school, public school, in-state, out-of-state tuition. All those decisions impact your financial plan, right? Because what I chose to do was something when I ran my financial plan, it made more sense for me to live in a different county to send my kids there because, and I'm not going to say anything negative about the public school system where we live, but that was just a decision that I made personally for my family. So, but we all have to make those decisions. And so what we thought we'd do is quantify what it is that we actually pay for kids. And we're going to look at it from a daycare perspective, from elementary, junior high, and high school perspective, and then college. Those are the 3 components we're going to look at. You guys good with that?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. So, Isaac, I'm going to let you take this first one because you and I are in the same boat. We've talked about the cost, even though my kids are several years out of daycare. By the way, I've got now a 5th grader and a 7th grader. So I know what we spent because actually in preparation for the show, I went and pulled out my tax returns to see what I spent. Now, out of full disclosure, I did mention that I am no longer with my children's mother. We have a great relationship, but I'm lucky and I only had to pay half of all these expenses, so it's awesome. But I did go pull up my tax returns because I actually wanted to know. I had forgotten how much we actually paid. So talk about daycare and what you guys actually spend for daycare.
So when we started looking, my wife is like incredibly analytical. So this is her kind of a thing right here. We almost could have had Kristen come in here and be the host instead of me. But I remember when we started looking for daycares, we had our first kid, and of course it's like you're handling them with kid gloves, being super cautious. And I remember we visited 12 daycares. Kristen found some way to download the state reports on each of the daycares to see what they failed to do on their checks and that kind of stuff. And where it came down to the cost, just to give people a little bit of an idea, at least in East End, Louisville, ranges anywhere from $750 to $1,200 a month per child. And they kind of do different discounts a little bit for additional children, but not really, because the good daycares have a huge waiting list. They don't really need to do much of a discount. So the one we ended up picking had a 10% discount for additional kids. And so thankfully, we've got 3. So we have a 6-year-old, 3.5-year-old, and then our youngest just turned 1. And so thankfully, we only had 3 children in daycare for just a really short period of time before Emerson started kindergarten, which he's had a very interesting first year of grade school with everything going on. But we're about to, thankfully, the daycares are going to reopen. So we're going to have 3 kids in daycare. So if we ran that out annually, it's about $30,000 to do that with the discounts and everything. Now, one of the important things here is that you can do like a daycare FSA. So there's a certain amount that you can put into an FSA, and that technically you kind of get the same benefit of an HSA or a regular healthcare FSA, where at least you don't pay taxes on it, and as long as you use it for the qualified expense, so you kind of get the triple taxation benefit there. So that's pretty cool. And then you have a certain amount that you get a tax credit for as well. So, but yeah, it's expensive. No way around it. I remember I grew up on the farm, and I just went to like the county school. I graduated from South Oldham with my wife, but that was just the last 2 years of high school. So most of my childhood just in the county school, wherever it was.
Right.
And I was like, who would ever pay for private school? Well, I've paid for daycare now, and now I understand it's a discount.
To go to private school.
Yeah, I'm like, wow, I wish they would offer daycare programs at these private schools. So, yeah, I mean, it's expensive. I will say, like, the positive side of it, because I think one of the things you always put the lens on with the education is what it does for your children. And one of the things my mom raised us at home, and so did Kristen's mom. And so we thought at first, because we were both working, my wife's really driven by her career, and there was like a little bit of like, oh man, like I'm not going to be there to raise them when they're really small. But man, they benefit so much from the socializing with kids their age. So it's done so much for them, like just being friendly and caring about other people, developing that human empathy early on. So that's one of those intangibles that that's not why you're doing it. You necessarily need good childcare. But that was one of the big things for us is like, are kids developing socially, culturally in such a way that it's going to serve them, and develop their personalities. So.
Yeah. So the other point I want to make, and Eric, I want to get your thoughts on that is you bring up an interesting point with the socialization of, being in daycare. My kids, we didn't really have, I guess we may have had a choice, but when I was with their mother, when we were having our children, it was essentially 6 weeks, and they were in daycare, which I understand a lot of people have. Hey, I don't want to put my child in daycare at 6 weeks old or whatever, but we really didn't have a choice because we both had careers. We were both of us are still to this day, very career focused. And so we really didn't have a choice. So our kids were literally in daycare from 6 weeks on up until the day they went to the one piece that I want to talk about my expense in just a few minutes, but the one component that I'll add in addition to the socialization is I don't really know the technical term. I want to say just it's 2020, June, whatever it is, 12th of 2020, is right in the middle of this pandemic. And I will say that since my kids have been in school really from 6 weeks on, they don't really get that sick.
Oh,
they just have this. Mm-hmm. I've been exposed to every crud known to man in these petri dishes of these, of these daycares and elementary school, that they really are not very sickly kids, which I don't know if that's just them being lucky or the fact that we exposed them to so much crud in the beginning that they just kind of built up some immunities.
No, there's a lot of truth to that because our kids were in daycare early. I mean, when our twins were born, so I've got 8-year-old twins. They just turned 8. We actually had a pretty bad run of luck after they were born. But for a while there, my father-in-law, the kid's grandfather, was staying at home with them, and both my wife and I were working full time. He actually took a fall down our steps one day, unfortunately, a pretty bad fall, and hurt his shoulder real bad, and he wasn't able to watch the kids. So to your point earlier, Isaac, about having to find a good daycare with a waiting list, we were stuck. This happened on a Friday. We were literally I had to come home work on a Friday morning to help take care of my kids for the rest of the day. And that afternoon, we're on the phone with virtually every daycare in town trying to find a spot for 2 infants.
Yeah.
On Monday morning.
Good luck.
Yeah.
So that was that was an interesting week. I mean, because we went from not having to pay that expense to just all of a sudden and not really having to plan for it.
Begging to pay the expense.
Begging,
somebody let me pay you.
Just so my wife and I could continue to work. And so we did that for a while. Luckily, over a period of time, my wife actually ended up getting another job, and so she had more flexibility in her hours, but yeah, it's definitely a shot to the system to go pay that expense for daycare. But to your point also about building that immunity, some other kids that we knew that had never been in daycare that went to kindergarten for the first time, and they were exposed to being they were sick all year, all the time.
Yeah. So, but back on daycare expense, one thing I did do in preparation for the show is I actually went back to my old tax returns. And because I knew that I was paying, and I remember it being a fairly big number, but I wasn't 100% sure. So I did go back and look, and we paid about just shy of $22,000 a year for both our kids. So I broke it down, and now this was a staggering number. I hope I did the math right, although on the car show, I kind of jacked a few of the expenses up a little bit.
Extra zeros. I mean, it was fine. You're trying to make yourself feel bad about that Wrangler, but you couldn't do it.
I know I was. But so remember, I said in the beginning that I only paid half the expenses. So really, I paid about $11,000 a year, but I paid for them up until they went to kindergarten. So it was about 5 years worth of expenses on both of them. So if you take $11,000 a year for both kids, it wound up being about a little over $50,000, and that give or take a little bit because some of the numbers were a bit off depending on when they were in school and summer and all that good stuff. But it's about $55,000 per kid for the 5 years in daycares. If you take $55,000, divide that or multiply that times 2, it's over $100,000. That we spent.
Do it times 3.
I know
it's a super cool number.
Yeah,
but you're exactly right, and never mind like. We have 2 April babies, and then in October, Tucker is going to be in there for 6 years.
Yeah,
because he's an October kiddo.
Yep.
So bonus year. But so I mean, if you're at home and you're kind of thinking about this, you need to average about 5.5 for planning. You're going to have about 5.5 years of whatever the expense is, just depending on when your kids' birthdays fall.
Yep.
So.
Okay, let's move on to elementary school. That's enough on daycare. So now they've been through daycare. Now they're entering really kindergarten / kind of first grade. But let's just assume kindergarten, first grade's that's all elementary school. So let's roll with elementary school. So let's talk about the expenses there. Now, one thing that is going to be a little bit different from Eric here. I actually chose to move to a county where I feel like they kind of get the same education they would normally get. Really, I think at elementary school, everybody's going to get the same education. I really feel like when you get into junior high, that's where you start to separate kind of the better schools from the lower performing schools. So I live in a county where they have great junior high, high school, even elementary school. And so we've been very, very happy with it. But I don't pay tuition, right? Now I pay county taxes and that sort of thing. So really what I'm going to look at is supplies, like what's my supplies every year, how much I pay for lunches. And I got my youngest, the dude eats more food than, I mean, it's staggering to see the amount of food that kid eats. But field trips, tutors, yes. I don't have rocket scientists as my 2 kids, so we've had to hire tutors. But some people have tutors, for all year. We just typically do it during the summer. and then we have after school care, right? So my elementary age kids went to after school care because they couldn't ride the bus home at 2:30 in the afternoon because neither me or their mom would be there. So we had to pay for after school care. So I'm gonna go through the numbers in a minute, but Eric, yours, the numbers are a little bit different, right?
Well, they're only different because we're adding one more additional expense, which is tuition, because I still have to pay all of those expenses in addition to the tuition for private or in my case, Catholic school.
Yep. All right, so and Eric, you might Isaac, you can take some notes on this. This is what you're going to run into.
I've only had the kindergarten for 2/3 of the year, so I'm missing the last third of expenses. I just know that the PTA is very active and creates a lot of ways for me to donate to the PTA. You guys are much more experts on these, so I'll bow to that.
Yeah. All right, so I just ran some quick numbers, and I'm going to run down through them, and then Eric, you can jump in with the tuition. So again, I don't pay for tuition or anything, but school supplies. School supplies for me, we can go out. There's two ways you do it, right? They say, well, you can go out and get a yellow, black, and green, whatever, notebook, and you can go do all this stuff. And really, we find it's more of a hassle because you can go into Walmart and they don't have one particular blue notebook. And so you have to drive all over town to find a blue notebook. And at the end of the day, they get their supplies back at the end of the year. And I don't know if they even really use them like that. But anyway, neither here nor there. We just pay the package deal that at the beginning of the year when they show up, they get a box that has everything they need in it. It's what the teachers want. And so we just pay that. It's $125 per kid per year. And so that's how we just do it. We just pay the $125 and we're done with it.
Same here.
Yep. So lunches. Lunches are a little bit interesting. We have one kid that loves to eat school lunches, and we have another kid that we pack his lunch every day. But in all reality, it works out to be about $2.50 either way you look at it, right? So, or maybe the numbers are a little bit less for the kid that we pack lunch because he's pretty much a PB&J kind of kid, but he buys a Powerade every day, that's $1.25. So really, when you look at it all together, it's about $2.50 per kid per day. Field trips, we threw in about $20. They're really not that expensive, but again, it's an expense, right? Tutors, last year, which was 2019, 2020 school year. That's right. Yeah.
Yep.
So that school year, we paid about $400 for the two of them together. We didn't
total. Yeah,
total. And then after school care, I paid my portion alone was $1,700. So it's about $110 or a couple $100 per week that he has to go after school care. But remember, I've got two of them. One of them now rides the bus home, and he's fine because he's junior high. But the other one, he's still in daycare. But for 5 years, we paid the after school care for the other one, right?
Yeah.
So all in, we're paying about, give or take a little bit, about $6,000 a year for all those expenses.
Okay.
And then what's Catholic school? I mean, talk
well,
about that.
So all those expenses for me are going to be slightly less because we do what we can to make our own lunches, pack lunches. Yep. So, we try to eliminate that expense with the exception of, Chick-fil-A days and Papa John days. Somehow our kids have come to the conclusion that Papa John's is the best pizza ever created. So they love Papa John Day at school.
We don't endorse Papa John's, by the way, nor do they give us any money for this show. But
I'm not making a comment one way or the other about the quality of their pizza. It's not bad. I don't know if it's probably a little bit of a stretch to say it's the best, but my kids certainly think so. I think it's just because they have the Papa John Day at school and they love it. But
yeah.
But outside of that, though, we try to basically bring our lunches. We don't do what we call it ESC, extended school care, but it's the same thing as the after school care. We don't have to do that any longer. That was about was it $25-$30 a week per kid.
Yeah.
But we don't take advantage of that anymore. Luckily, my wife she works from home, and we also have her father who is retired, so he helps out a lot, which is a huge blessing for us. So we don't have quite that level of expense for those things.
Yeah. But
tuition in and of itself, and of course this is a sore subject because I literally just the other day got the tuition schedule for next year for this coming fall, which is increased for next year. But I've got two kids in the same school. And in Catholic schools, at least in the grade school level, you get a little bit of a discount for having multiple kids. So if you have one kid, you're going to pay X number. If you have two kids, you're not going to pay necessarily that same number twice. So you have three kids, you even get even more of a discount. But all in, tuition for this coming school year is going to be about $9,000 a year for two kids. That's actually up from a little over $8,000 last year. So that's going to be quite the increase. But on top of that, we've also got enrollment fees for $440 per kid. So all in expense for the year, we're paying just under about $10,000 for what will be their third grade year coming up. In addition to some of those other expenses, you tack on another, $1,000 or $2,000 for the supplies and the lunches and the field trips. And it's funny, we're actually looking at getting our son involved in some tutoring as well this summer, which is going to be a little bit more expensive than what you were looking at. A little bit more specific, at least for, kind of a 12-week program that we're looking at. But it's not cheap.
Yeah, So the interesting thing, though, as you bring that up, the one thing I totally didn't put in here was from, really from the time they started school, which daycare was out, right? I didn't even put this in there. I need to go back and look at my numbers. But from that point until our oldest is out of sixth grade, from that time period, we had them in all these camps, these summer camps all year. And how we did it was the very first year we put them in camp after they got out of daycare. We did the local YMCA, whatever. And it was just the same thing every day. And that's great. I know a lot of kids do it, but my kids got really bored. So we started splitting up and we did the zoo one time. We did baseball camp. One camp after another. I couldn't believe how unbelievably expensive that is. I didn't even have that in here.
Well, you're basically paying for daycare.
Yeah.
It's essentially what it is, the different form of daycare.
Yeah.
But
yeah. So I just did some quick numbers. Now, I didn't include that number, which I probably should have. And that's been again, a daycare number, at least during the summer months. But with all those expenses, it winds up being about $6,000 a year per kid for all those expenses. Of course, I had 2 kids, and they each went for 5 years. And so elementary school. And so it's about, if elementary school is about $60,000 just for school supplies, tutors, lunches, so on and so forth, over the elementary school period. And then I've had one kid that's been in junior high for a year. And so you add another $6,000 or so on there. Actually, a little bit less because he doesn't go to after school care. But really, it's about $60,000 or 6,000 times 5 is 30,000. So it's about $60,000 you're paying all those experiences during just elementary school alone
for 2 kids.
For 2 kids,
about 30,000 per child, and daycare is about 55 per
Yep.
child, and then Eric's got an additional 9,000.
Yeah.
You could go on a deep dive calculation, which nobody wants to listen to, about property taxes and home values, and then start weighing the options, like that kind of a thing. But yeah, that's a interesting. That's still a big number. You wouldn't think you'd have that much of an expense when you're sending your kids to public school.
I know. Yeah, well, it's just all these little ancillary numbers that come up, just like on your car. You don't think you're going to pay almost $90,000 for a car over 4 years, but you really do. We broke the numbers down. By the way, if you want to catch that show, go back and listen to our podcast. It's Peace of Mind Radio Podcast, anywhere you download your favorite podcast, and you can catch all of our previous shows. So make sure you check that out. All right, so let's move on to, are we good on elementary, kind of elementary, junior high? And remember, we're just talking elementary because we don't have kids in high school yet. Yeah. So those expenses, some of the expenses don't, like after school care and that sort of thing, but
travels, sports.
Yeah, but then you got travel and sports, which is probably the same, if not more, $100 a week. Oh, yeah. I'd say is probably just, if not more.
Well, it's funny because we're breaking this down purely on from a financial standpoint, right? And when we talk about, or when my wife and I were discussing options for our kids, when we were trying to enroll them in school, or thinking about enrolling them in school, taking this public versus private debate. Luckily, we're blessed to be in a position where we can afford, Catholic private schools, which is absolutely fantastic for us. But really, the decision for us was not about finances. We have to put up with the finances, and it's an expense. We sometimes have to grin and bear it. It is what it is. But for the most part, we're not. There's largely non-financial reasons why we're going that route, and probably for the same reasons you changed counties, and instead of moving and changing counties, we're just doing it this way. So.
Yeah, so just as a quick breakdown real quick before we leave. So we talked about elementary school and some of the expenses, but if you extend that through high school and you're assuming that $6,000 is an accurate number, really over the course of a child from, let's say, kindergarten through high school, it's about $70,000 per kid that you're spending on all these ancillary numbers outside of what you're already paying for daycare, which that's not in my number. So if you got 2 kids, obviously that's about $140,000 over the course of their educational years.
Well, K through 8, that's 9 years of school for grade school. You know, $10,000 $10,000 a pop. You know, we're looking at over 90,000 adjusted for inflation. Like I said, the tuition just went up from 9,000 to 10,000 this year. So I would imagine it's probably going to continue to increase.
Yep.
So well over $100,000 just for grade school.
Yeah, yeah. All right, so we've tackled daycare. We talked about how much that could be. Not everybody chooses to send their kids at that expensive of daycare, but that's the numbers. We talked about elementary, junior high, and high school, sort of estimated those numbers. Let's move on to one of the topics that we get a lot of questions about, and that's college, right? Most people don't even think, well, I need to, how do I budget or plan for elementary, daycare and elementary, and junior high and high school, which they should be considering. Most people just think college, right? Yeah. So that's the reason why we did this show is because you have to think about more expenses other than just estimating for college, right?
Yeah, and I think a lot of the conversations we've had with clients is, thinking about one of the most important things people see, and there's a ton of people that would agree with this, I would think, that are listening, saving all your money and investing very little in their education early and then just piling all that money into college and expecting that they're just going to use that money judiciously and be so grateful that you paid for their tuition. I think a lot of people would find that child necessarily doesn't always respect the sacrifice that the parents made for that.
Absolutely.
So to Brian's point, thinking about how to properly educate your child and teach your child how to be respectful of what you're putting into that. And I think bringing them into that conversation gives them probably a better college experience. So sometimes we've had a lot of that conversation with clients where Louisville is fortunate to have a good amount of school options if you think about it, and like you, willing to relocate in some situations. But thinking about the total formation of your kid. What do you want them to be? How do you want them to be raised? Who do you want them to be around? All that kind of stuff. And that could go in a million directions.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that's a legacy thing early on, right? If you're doing a financial plan, you're thinking about legacy, one of the best things you can do is invest into them real heavy when they're at their youngest, because it's hard to change things down the road, to be honest. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so one of the things that we did for college expenses when a prospective client or even a client has a child, or they come to us and say, hey, I want to start considering, how do I start saving to either fund college or how do I offset college? We're not going to be talking about 529 savings plans today. That's for another show. But one of the things that we do is we show them, typically somebody's not coming to us saying, hey, I need to save money because my kid's going to school next year. That's not the case. What we often get is, hey, I've got a 1-year-old or a 5-year-old or a 7-year-old. I want to start saving for college expenses. Can we take a look at it? So what I did was, in preparation for the show, I used my youngest as an example. He's 10. He's going to be in 5th grade. And I just ran an estimate, college estimate. And we have a program, by the way, that we can do that. It also shows you how you need to be saving or how much you need to have as a lump sum or on a monthly basis, save in order to fund to whatever degree you want to fund. And so what we run is we ran an estimate, and I just picked U of L, right? University of Louisville. We are in Louisville, Kentucky. And so I chose an in-state public institution for my youngest, who's 10. He's in 5th grade. And so I said, okay, we'll be in 5th grade. Let's see what University of Louisville's estimated based on the rate of inflation that has been going on for years. I think they date that back 20 years to get a rate of inflation. But what it would cost him to go to U of L for 4 years. Now, I mentioned earlier that we had to tutor our kids, so the likelihood of my kids getting an academic scholarship are probably nil. So we're obviously, they're, physically they're pretty good and they do play a sport. That's probably not that option. So I'm budgeting that I'm playing full boat when they go to college, okay? Now, what we did was when I ran the estimates, this college program estimated that the University of Louisville, when he goes to school, which is in a number of years, was going to be about $43,000 a year. Okay? Now, that's everything. That's tuition, room and board, meal tickets. It's pretty much everything you would imagine other than travel and things like that.
And
right?
that's a projection in the future, to be clear. That's not based off, it is based off current tuition rates, but it's based off future projections.
Correct. Yeah,
of what
that's
it would
not
cost.
today. That's
Yeah.
saying when he goes to school. I forgot I can't remember the actual year he goes to school right now, but or when he's actually estimated to go to college. But at that point, they're saying based on the rate of inflation today, that is what he would typically want to spend. Now, is it always the case that every kid pays every single expense when they go to school? No. Some kids choose to live at home. They can live off campus and be less expensive than a dorm. Because I will tell you, dorms are expensive, right? I mean, it's incredibly expensive.
Quite luxurious these days.
That's true. Well, yeah.
It's a different living experience from,
Right.
from what I had my freshman year, for
And
sure.
not every kid pays for a full meal ticket, that's 3 meals a day, 7 days a week or whatever. Not every kid does that. We understand that. And some kids get some form of a scholarship, whether it's academic or sports driven or keys money or something. There's always, so nobody pays actual full price, although I'll probably be the first person in history that does. But even with that being said, that's just an overestimate, but it gives you an idea about what college is going to be. There are additional expenses to that, right? And that's kind of what we want to tackle. So one thing it does not include is travel to and from. So you're typically going to have, not every parent, but some kids are going to have some travel, right? It could be an airline ticket. It could be you're driving your kid to school and dropping them off, or it could be that they have a car, right? You have your kid that drives a car to school. So there's insurance, there's gas, there's fuel to and from. When you go visit your kid, there's hotels and things because you're obviously not going to spend the night in the dorm. But there's all those expenses. Plus, you're going to give them spending money, right? You're just going to give them money to say, hey, you want to go out and have a good time out? Well, oh my.
Wait, parents can do that?
Yeah.
I need to go talk to my parents.
I know. But typically, you're going to give them a little bit of spending money, to go to the movies or whatever the case is.
I got you a library pass, Eric. What else do you need? That was included in the bill, man. That's your hangout spot.
Yeah. And then you're going to have food, right? So even if you have some sort of on-campus meal pass or whatever, you're still going to be able to, they want to go out and to XYZ and grab a burger or go grab a pizza with their buddies sometimes. So I get that part. And then the one thing I never got the privilege of doing, but I know a lot of kids do, and that is sort of take spring break, right? I never had the privilege of doing that because I didn't have money to do it.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I know. But some kids go, on spring break or, they
do a travel abroad. Like they have a semester abroad or something like that.
Yep.
That's pretty common.
Yeah, or you can even say, hey, my favorite football team is playing on a road trip and I want to go support my football team or basketball team, whatever, and you're traveling to those locations or whatnot. So anyway, you kind of budget some kind of number for those. So that being said, I thought we'd throw some numbers together for college and just kind of see what it all looks like. So on average, in-state tuition for University of Louisville is about $43,000 a year. And I budgeted in like $10,000 a year just to throw a number in there to say those are the ancillary, money that you're going to give your kids for all those things we just talked about. Right? Mm-hmm. So with that being said, it's about, over the course of 4 years, which is a completely staggering number, it's about $200,000 to send your kid to college, give or take. Now, again, there's scholarships and there's keys money and all this other good stuff. But really, for me, I'm budgeting. Now, again, I only had to pay half that number, thank goodness. But again, that's about what you need to budget for college. Are you guys seeing any different numbers, or is it about what you're talking about with clients?
No, I mean, you really have to adjust for inflation. I can give you a personal experience. When I graduated from college, I went to Bellarmine here in Louisville from 2000 to 2004. So when I graduated in 2004, my overall tuition, I was not actually living on campus, but my overall tuition alone was about $17,000, give or take. If I was living on campus and doing the meal plan and all that stuff, it would have been even more. Tuition alone this year for Bellarmine is about $42,000.
Yeah.
So I mean, you're talking about almost about triple, about 300% increase in just a matter of 15, 16 years.
Yep.
Project another 10, 15 years down the line. I mean, who knows what it will be? It's a lot of money, and I mean the numbers you're putting up for U of L, those are very realistic numbers when you include or project for inflation. So yes, it's definitely those are the types of numbers that we need to plan for.
Yeah, and I think it's, again, when you look at building in some expenses for daycare and like grade school, middle school, high school, whether your children are rocket scientists or not, it would behoove you to help them to be good students, not only so they don't waste this college money down the road, but so that they potentially could get some scholarship. And also a lot of the scholarships are built on what kind of extracurricular activities they can do, which carries a cost, right? Like you would increase your cost the more that they do and the more they participate in, but they're going to be better, well-rounded people, and they'll have other grants that they could get through those programs that they participated in. So you really have to find something that your kid likes to do. And, you know, I know being an athlete, like that made college not cost anything, which was great. But I know my dad spent a ton of money. It wasn't like it was free.
Right.
I remember flying out, you know, around the country, doing events, doing competitions and that. But he really like invested in me that way. And then, you know, then I was able to, he still had a college fund set up, and then he allowed that to, he still gave it to me. Right. And, you know, as appreciation,
right.
basically. And, you know, then I could kind of choose. And I think what he did a really good job was educating me on things early on so that I appreciated that, like, you know, that kind of thing. And I think that's the best gift you can give your kids.
Yep.
You know, we see so many people that come in and they're frustrated with leaving behind money because they don't think their children are prepared. But, you know, if we've got young families, we really try to help encourage them that you can teach your children. And, my kids are obviously little, so what I would do would be different than you two. But, you know, they all have the spend, save, share kind of piggy banks. Mm-hmm. And we do a nighttime routine with that. And then it's fun to see how they choose to, like, be nice to their friends at daycare where they bring in muffins or cupcakes or something. But they're taking that money out of that. So they learn how to budget in a very simple way early. And then what I hope is that we'll open little investment accounts and, like, involve them in the process with little games. So by the time they get to college, they at least should have some fundamental understanding. Doesn't mean they won't become a knucklehead 1 year in for maybe a 2-year stretch. Right. But, you know, like that's the best thing you can do is make the money that you spend effective. Because if you add all this up, which I'm sure Brian is about to do, it's a ton of money. Mm-hmm. And make it effective because you're going to have to do it. It's part of it. It's a nice thing to do for your children, and they deserve what we're putting into them. But try to make it as effective as possible.
Yeah, so I hope the camera just didn't shut off. It sounded like it did, but anyway, we'll keep going. One of the more interesting things is when you, so you know, to your point, when you say you're educating your kids and you're saying, hey, we've got them on a budget and we allow them to spend their money. It's kind of the exact same thing we do with clients, right? The only way to really budget for this expense and understand how it really affects you is everything is shutting off. Is the fact that we're still going over here on audio.
We have audio.
we have audio. We're good here. Yeah.
But the interesting thing is that really it comes down to how we walk clients through a financial plan to understand the impact of all this. Right. That's kind of that's the genesis of everything we talk about is doing a good, solid financial plan will understand these expenses. So, so to your point, I did do some rough numbers and said, what does this actually cost me for 2 kids over the course of daycare all the way through college? And again, numbers are going to be a little bit different. So I kind of just did a round number, and it's about $600,000 to send both my kids educational. Now, again, I only pay half that number, but that's about the number. So the biggest portion of that's college. I mean, it's staggering, but that's only 200 some $1,000 of that. The other, well, it's about 300,000. So the rest of it's coming from daycare, elementary school, junior high, high school. All those numbers come in, and it's amazing when you throw those numbers around to say, yeah, you need to save, but you need to save for everything, not just college. Because of those numbers. So anyway, that's the numbers I came up with, about $600,000.
I think one takeaway that I talk to clients a lot about is when you start looking and projecting some of those numbers out, not to be overwhelmed by them. Because what you do not want to do is when we talked about this in our last episode when we were talking about paying off the mortgage, being singularly focused on that goal. Yeah. You don't want to be so singularly focused on saving for your children's college funds because you might have kids that don't even want to go to college. And I think you're actually seeing because the cost of college has increased to a point where it's just almost not sustainable, hopefully, knock on wood. Hopefully some of those costs will decrease. But you don't want to save for your kids' college at the expense of your retirement. Because your kids, at the very least, they have an opportunity to get grants, to get scholarships, and to take out student loans and pay those student loans off. It's not necessarily an ideal situation. We would all love to be able to pay for everything for our kids, I would imagine. But I'm actually seeing more and more clients that come in and say, you know what, I'm doing what I can now. I'm paying for, and this is kind of the approach my wife and I are taking. We're paying for, private grade school, private high school. We're definitely not going to be able to save nearly as much for college as, probably some of their friends or some of, as we could have if we had invested or not invested in private schools, right? So to some degree, our kids are going to have to fend for themselves. And I had to do it, and I'm actually seeing a lot of clients take that approach, saying, you know what, my client or my kids are going to be okay. They're going to have time to figure it out, and hopefully, if I'm doing my job as a parent, and if my clients are doing their jobs as parents, they're going to set their kids up for success down the line to be able to figure out what option is going to be best for them.
Yeah, I think ultimately, we as parents we're responsible for providing them an education about life. And helping them understand that stuff. And it isn't, to Eric's point, all about money that's given to them. And so, again, effectiveness, I think, is just trying to make your kids effective people and that understand who they are and what they're trying to do, because it's not one thing. And the more expensive college gets, the tougher that investment becomes as far as how viable. I think it's going to be interesting how it gets reshaped after a certain point. But, we don't know where that's going. That would be tough to do in this podcast. But the best thing you can do, man, is make them good, solid people, and that's ultimately going to serve them the best way possible.
Yeah. So let's do this. Let's just kind of wrap up today's show. And really, when it comes down to the point behind the show today is just to point out general expenses on how much education really costs your kids, or really costs you. But here's the thing, to Eric's point, there's no reason to stress over it. Right, we just gave you some numbers. Not everybody's going to send their kid to daycare. It's going to be so expensive. Most people go, and don't necessarily spend all the money on junior high school and elementary expenses. Not every kid's going to go to college. Some kids are going to get expenses. The bottom line is that you can do a good, solid financial plan and estimate for these expenses, and you can learn to budget and save for these expenses. And once you have your plan in place, you can feel good about, hey, I know I'm saving enough money to be able to pay for all these expenses or budget for these expenses sort of as I go. And I'm also able to save enough to then accumulate enough throughout my lifetime so that when I want to retire, I have enough money saved up that'll provide the lifestyle I want from now until the day I die, right? So that's the point, is do a good, solid financial plan, and you'll be completely fine. It'll give you the peace of mind that you want to know that, hey, I know I'm going to be able to make it.
Yeah.
Right. That's the key. Just do a good financial plan. All right, let's wrap up the show today. Any final comments?
Listen, subscribe, rate, review.
Perfect. He said a lot better than I could. Catch you guys next week for another edition of Peace of Mind Radio Podcast.
Thanks for listening.
All right. Everybody have fun.
The information given herein is taken from sources at IFP Advisors, LLC, doing business as Independent Financial Partners, IFP, IFP Securities, doing business as IFP, and its advisors believed to be reliable, but it is not guaranteed by us as to accuracy or completeness. This is for informational purposes only, and in no event should be construed as an offer to sell or solicitation of an offer to buy any securities or products. Please consult your tax and/or legal advisor before implementing any tax and/or legal related strategies mentioned in this publication, as IFP does not provide tax and/or legal advice. Opinions expressed are subject to change without notice and do not take into account the particular investment objectives, financial situation, or needs of individual investors. This report may not be reproduced, distributed, or published by any person for any purpose without IFP's express prior written consent. Securities offered through IFP Securities, LLC, doing business as Independent Financial Partners, IFP, member of FINRA and SIPC. Investment advice offered through IFP Advisors, doing business as IFP, a registered investment advisor. IFP and Family Wealth Planning Partners are not affiliated. The information given herein is taken from sources that IFP Advisors, LLC, doing business as IFP, IFP Securities, LLC, doing business as IFP, and its advisors believed to be reliable, but it is not guaranteed by us as to accuracy or completeness. This is for informational purposes only, and in no event should be construed as an offer to sell or solicitation of an offer to buy any securities or products. Please consult your tax and or legal advisor before implementing any tax and or legal related strategies mentioned in this publication, as IFP does not provide tax and or legal advice. Opinions expressed are subject to change without notice and do not take into account the particular investment objectives, financial situation, or needs of individual investors.